Okay.
I can hear Andreas.
Mm-hmm.
Genevieve, are you talking? I can't hear you anymore.
Good.
Good. Okay, so shall I start? So I'll make a start now. Okay. Okay. Hello, everybody. Sorry about all that mucking around. So we're talking about better babies, and the take-home message is that oxytocin has got a lot to do with this. And I'd like to draw your attention to a study that was put out in 2017 by Patricia and Mahesh. They looked at many thousand babies, and they came out with the statement that the most robust children are conceived when both parents are lost in each other in an erotic climax. So what that means is that the babies are conceived in a totally oxytocin milieu. And of course, that puts us in mind of Hanuman's injunction in aphorism number 9, when he says that robustness is imperative because in the heavy, healthy living state, our indwelling rational spirit can freely avail itself of this living, healthy instrument for the higher purpose of existence. That's what we're here for. So what sort of things can affect the constitution? Well, the sexual history of the parents can, and we know that epigenetic threads are expressed in the microRNA of body fluids, that's the ovum and the sperm. The health of both parents at the time of conception is important, and the folinic acid state of both parents. Now, folinic acid is the activated form of folate, and it should be emphasized for at least 3 months prior to conception. And both parents contribute genetic material, and the folate affects the messenger RNA, so it has a pivotal role to play in the moderation of the DNA, especially when there's a tubercular miasm. If it's active and the neonate is in danger of acquiring a midline abnormality, this is where this becomes important. And the zinc status of both parents is important. Other things we know from the IVF research that's done is that there's got to be a fair amount of magnesium in the mix. They recommend 600 milligrams a day. That's it there. And that this is uptaken, it's optimized if there's enough selenium, 200 micrograms a day of selenium. Lots of vitamin D is important, and also iodine levels, especially when we're dealing with the sepia woman, because she can often have a compromised thyroid, and the thyroid is really important for conception and also for lactogenesis. So this is the oxytocin molecule. You can see here that it's mostly a lot of amino acids, basic amino acids. Right here in the middle, there's this little sulfur bond, 2 sulfur bonds, which is what connects it to Sora, in my opinion. Now, when I saw this for the first time, I thought, oh my goodness, it looks like a little snake. And then my mind went to, well, every culture on the planet has some kind of creation myth associated with a serpent. So the Sumerians had one, the Chinese, the Aztecs and the Mayans gave us the feathered serpent. The Phoenicians gave us the Ouroboros. Greeks had one. And in Australia, we've got the rainbow serpent. And so when you think about it, our DNA is very serpentine in the way it undulates. So there is a connection there. And even cosmically, there's a connection. This photograph appeared earlier this year, taken by the James Webb Telescope. It's a chain of 20 galaxies stretching 13 million light years. And just look at the shape of it. It's a very pervasive pattern that's there in all of creation. So I think it's important that we look a little bit more into this. And so this is the Ouroboros, the snake that swallows its own tail. And when you see it like this, we sort of think of, this is infinity. It's something that lasts forever, has no ending. So that puts it in the realm of immortal. And when you turn it on its side, it places it in an upright position. It's the Merkaba, or the light body, that we need for ascension, the highest purpose of existence. That's what we're here for. But we just refer to that as the numeral 8. Oxytocin has 8 letters. Its gematria is 8. And 8 in numerology is called the achiever, and it measures life by the goals that it reaches. And the gematria of Alac Humanum is also 8, and it's a sarcode rich in oxytocin. So you can see there's a real theme here. So our goal, as aphorism 9 directs us, is to seek a higher purpose. And I think it's significant, in my opinion, that some of our colleagues have in recent years added valuable insights to our philosophy by working with this number. So Jan Scholten has, Sankaran has, Tina Smits and Yakir have. They've all proffered models of perspective based on the number 8. And this is the model that I like to follow. It's the work of Erik Erikson. And he says that as we go through life, we have 8 epigenetic stages, and at each stage there is a crisis that has to be resolved before you can move to the next stage. We're talking about making better babies. So this is the area that we need to look at. This is the 2 stages here are with the mother. So if the pregnancy has gone well and the birth has gone well and the baby's been able to go to the breast, the baby develops a sense of trust. I feel safe. My mother is still there for me. And as the baby begins to crawl and begins to walk, it will leave the mother, start to develop a sense of self, but can come back knowing that the safe place is there for him. The breast is still available to him. And so then he develops a sense of autonomy. Okay. So by the age of 4, they're more inclined to be more social, correspond more with their peer group. My mum, I'm too old for this. Happy to go out and be in play groups and play, go to school after that, love learning, be really excited to learn new things, hit puberty and negotiate that without falling apart, and then be able to form intimate relationships, get a job, be part of society, contribute to making the world a better place. And then in senescence, can really focus on this business of higher purpose of existence. Now, if this did not go well, you're not soaring like I've got here. I call this the stairway to heaven. You're then stuck in the shadow of psychosis. There's lack of trust. There's a feeling of shame and doubt, feeling of guilt and inferiority, role confusion. Now, that's huge in the world at the moment with all this gender dysphoria. Sense of being isolated, stagnated. And then at the end of life, the syphilitic miasm comes in and everything breaks down. And then you have to come back and do it all again. That's why circles is a big theme in the lax. So I just leave that one with you, and it will become a little bit more understood, I think, as we go through. The first 4 years with the mother, the first 1,000 days is really important. So I mentioned before about the importance of zinc. So when conception occurs, there's what they call a zinc spark. They know about that from research. I know this is CGI generated, but I've chosen this because it puts you in that let there be light kind of frame, which of course refers back to the Bible. God said, let there be light, and creation began. And so I'd like you to kind of ponder on the fact that conception, in a way, is a sacred event. I mean, with the first cell division, we get a vesica Pisces, which is a very, very sacred space when it comes to creation. And so you get 2 cells, 4 cells, 8 cells, 16 cells, 32. So you've got this doubling all the time. And what's happening is that those clumps of cells are replicating the Platonic solids in sacred geometry. And then you eventually end up with this collection here, which is called the Tree of Life. Again, a very sacred pattern in sacred geometry. In medicine, we call it the morula, this clump of cells here. That word in Latin is the Latin word for mulberry. And so this little mulberry rolls down the fallopian tube, looking for the fundus. Now, mulberry is associated with initiation into sovereignty. We know in the Old Testament that David slept under the mulberry tree the night before he was anointed king. So this clump of cells is moving down to become a sovereign being. When it reaches the fundus, elongates, turns inside out, and becomes toroidal in shape. Now that's the shape where energy translates into matter. Okay, and then the zygote phase begins, and the first organ to develop is the heart, which again is a tortoise. So we go from the sacred to the profane. Now, this company here, Ectolife, it's a real company. It's just waiting for ethics approval, which I hope they never get, where they can create babies in a petri dish, grow them in a pod, and then give them to the birthing person who does not have a uterus. Now, these babies are not going to have any oxytocin receptors, and they are for sure going to be on the spectrum. It's very, very sad. But the thing is, IVF, is big business. As you can see down the bottom there, it's a lucrative industry, annual profits of 1.5 billion. So if conception, is associated with an erotic climax, that means that oxytocin, which is the neurotransmitter, which regulates homeostasis, we know this from research, and I say SORA, I'll talk more about later, it's got a really important role to play here. So consideration needs to be given to IVF and all forms of surrogacy. In Australia, 1 in 6 couples now seeks help with infertility. And conceptions in Australia in a petri dish are now 1 in 18, which is huge. And there are implications for that, which we're now going to look at. So there's research coming out about this. In 2019, the Uni of Minnesota did some research published in JAMA, and it said that just under 20% of children who are conceived by IVF are at risk for cancer in the first 5 years of life, most common cancer being leukemia. So what we need to keep in mind here, since the microRNA are in body fluids, that's the ova and the sperm, these carry the epigenetic imprints going back at least 3 generations. We know that from research. So we're now buying eggs and buying sperm, hiring uteruses, and thinking that, that's quite fine to do. But it isn't necessarily. It's really making a mess of things, in my opinion. Ancestors matter, particularly through the matrilineal line, because the true epigenetic thread is passed down from woman to woman in the mitochondria, in the ovum. So this is something that we need to have a conversation about as a society. So when they're working in the IVF space, they're using technology that's referred to as CRISPR technology. It's a system found in some bacteria, stands for clustered, regularly interspaced, short palindromic repeats. And scientists have adapted this system along with a special protein called Cas9, where they'll cut and they'll edit DNA in desired spots. But research is coming out now saying that, there's a lot of unintended consequences, a lot of genetic changes that are different from random mutations, and that's a bit of a worry. There's that study there. You can go back and look at it later. In particular, this gene here is the one that, I am most concerned about. It's called the VMAT2 gene, vesicular monoamine transporter number 2. It's a special gene, and it's called the God gene, as it opens an individual to spirituality and the ability to connect to source. It can be deleted in the lab using CRISPR or damaged. Now, we know that this gene is supported when there's a lot of oxytocin in the mix at conception. So an oxytocin milieu is really important. But if the gene is damaged, we know from research that there can be increases in a range of mental issues, from lowered intellectual capacity, anxiety, schizophrenia, Parkinson's and cerebral palsy have an association, so diabetes and other autoimmune syndromes, cardiac arrhythmias and cancer. So this is not a trivial thing. So moving right along, I'm going to now look at the role that spermatozoa play in this space. Recent study has shown that there's a correlation between a common bacteria found in the vaginal microbiome. It's called Lactobacillus iners. And what it does is it causes decreased sperm motility in men experiencing infertility. So you need healthy, abundant, motile sperm in order to get past that first gate. And so men have to have a lot of arginine in their diet, and they're going to find that in nuts and seeds. which are also very high in zinc. There's a study there if you want to look at it later. So we know too that the phthalates from plastics, environmental toxins, are causing a huge reduction in sperm numbers. And the general advice has for several decades been to store food in glass or stainless steel, filter the tap water, wear natural fibres, that's men and women, and have a healthy lifestyle with regard to diet and environment. You know, we need to be looking at this in a multifactorial way in order to balance things out. Because as this meme shows you, fertility is on the decline. And as you can see there, plastics have got a fair bit to play with this. So they're saying that the term now sperm apocalypse is being used. Sperm counts have dropped 50% in the last 50 years. And so we think that the shift from saturated fats to polyunsaturated fatty acids in modern diets is linked to this. Certainly it reduces testosterone levels. And these polyunsaturated fatty acids are more prone to oxidative stress that damages sperm and that holds the microRNA, and it will contribute to epigenetic disturbances and to miscarriages. So just making simple dietary changes can really help. So we need to be going back to saturated fats using ghee. It will really improve reproductive health and the testosterone levels. So what else causes sperm numbers to drop? Well, microplastics do, especially polyethylene. What it causes is localized oxidative stress and mitochondrial dysfunction, okay, and overexpression of pro-inflammatory cytokines in the testes. So other reproductive issues have also been observed, such as reduced testosterone due to the estrogens that come from plastics, and also from chemicals including sugar substitutes. And research has shown that consuming more than 7 sweetened drinks per week reduces sperm concentration by 22%. And it negatively impacts on the sperm count, the shape, and the movement of the sperm. And in animal studies, we know that this has been associated with feminization of males, and we've not really looked at this deeply in humans, so we don't know to what extent that this is an issue. And then there are the STIs, and they've got chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, HIV, hepatitis. This new one here called Mycoplasma genitalium. It's a bit like a UTI. But this one down here, it just came out in May this year. It's really scary. So they're thinking that toxoplasmosis may also be a contributor. This study showed for the first time that human sperm lose their heads upon direct contact with the parasite, which is commonly found in cat litter boxes. So this business of plastics is quite pervasive and quite insidious. We know from a study done in 2022, Environmental International, that they're now found microplastics in human blood. And so that can affect the developing organs via the placenta in a pregnancy. And the worst culprits are the new bisphenol A's, the substitutes there in the plastic water bottles, other plastic products, including Band-Aids, I might add, and they're actually more toxic than the original BPA. So when they combine them, the reproductive outcomes are worsened. And so that study is there for you to look at later. And there's also been a very recent study has just come out where they've looked at non-stick cookware can alter the expression of up to 600 genes. That's huge. And the genes involved are synaptic growth and neural function. So this is an area that needs looking at. And then we've got the environmental toxins. We know from research that there's a lot of negative impacts on health and reproduction from a lot of these chemicals, dactyl, chloroprophos, atrazine, and also the effluent from intensive animal farming affects drinking water. A lot of European countries have already banned these substances, but that's not a universal thing. And there's a new study has just come out where researchers at Cambridge University had decided to test the effect of over 1,000 chemical contaminants, and they looked at 22 different species of gut bacteria in the lab, and they found that the chemicals are toxic to bacteria found in the healthy human gut. So that's really important and quite serious and worrying. And then there's glyphosate. I mean, glyphosate's the most widely used herbicide. It disrupts female hormones, damages ovaries and uteri, makes it very difficult for women to get pregnant. And according to a review of human and animal research published in March 2025, so that's quite new research, and it pinpoints an association with PCOS and endometriosis. And there's been a French study that's found that 55% of sperm samples in the infertility clinics contain glyphosate. Actually, there was a study that's just come out in the last couple of weeks in Israel where they've it was only a small study, but they did nested PCR testing. That means they sent the samples to 3 different labs and they all got the same results. So men who are vaccinated against COVID, 100% of them had spike protein in their sperm. The women who were vaccinated against COVID and were pregnant, 88% of them had spike protein in their blood. And women who were pregnant but not vaccinated against COVID, 55% of them had COVID vaccine in their blood, which gives the tip to shedding. And we've all been very busy treating shedding. So that's a very, very worrisome study. But the good news is that in America, RFK Jr. just in the last couple of weeks said they're going to start redirecting a lot of money to regenerative agriculture. So they're going to slowly turn this around. It's probably going to take a decade, but that's very good news. So does the method of birth matter? Well, yes, because there's this feedback loop. Ferguson reflex has a role to prime oxytocin receptors in the infant. And there's been research that indicates that trauma around birth has got long-term ramifications associated with self-harm and suicide. Now, all of these come into the orbit of lac maternum and lac humanum and lac defloratum. And these studies were done by teams in Scandinavia. The same team looked at this a decade apart, and both times they found that self-destructive behaviour and the tendency to suicide was big in this group. Now, lac maternum, main ideology is birth trauma. That business of, I don't want to be in this body because it was just too horrible at the time I was assigned to it. And I think it's the main remedy for the dysphoria that's happening everywhere. I want to go back to the previous life I was in. So when the baby is coming down the birth canal, this is the area that has to be negotiated, and it's very rich in all sorts of bacteria, and that's important because it seeds the microbiome. So in the last weeks of pregnancy, the baby's ingesting vernix, and what that does is creates a specific niche within the baby's intestines for the branched chain fatty acids. So it's your bifidobacterium, your bacteroids, and proteobacterium, which are going to be predominant there. So when the baby comes down the vagina and onto the perineum, the oral mucosa is further seeded, and the baby arrives, being exposed to all of that, especially the fecal bacteria. And then the baby's put on the mother's chest and gets it skin to skin, and all the bacteria that's on the mother's skin also inoculates the baby. And because the human microbiome in the gut has got about 4,500 different types of bacteria and up to 80% of our immune cells, this really is very important that this happens. And what we're finding is that, if it's a vaginal birth, you're going to have a lot of the good bacteria that are listed there. And also you can add to that the bifidobacterium and the bacteroids. But if it's going to be a C-section, it's a very, very different, and especially preterm babies as well, it's a very, very different situation. These babies have got these kind of bacteria in the predominant: staph, corynebacterium, proprium bacteria, or even really pathogenic microbial communities such as Klebsiella, Enterococcus, and Clostridium. So this came out just a few days ago from England. For the first time in England now, caesarean births have overtaken vaginal births. There's going to be huge implications from this. It's very sad, because this is what birth needs to look like. The baby's born, the mother receives the baby, lifts the baby straight onto her chest, leaves the cord intact till it's stopped pulsing. The baby gets all that extra blood. There's a whole lot of really good things happen then. And then she leans back and leaves the baby on her chest. The chest will keep her baby warm. Every time the baby wriggles and squirms, and they've done research on this, she gets a peak of oxytocin, which makes her fall more and more and more in love with her baby. And the baby, because it's that first hour, there's huge adrenaline in the baby's system. The baby goes looking for sustenance, and its instinct is to find the breast. And within that first hour, a well baby will find the nipple and will attach to it. And that's important because nipples come in all shapes and sizes, and it's really important that nothing goes in that baby's mouth before the mother's nipple goes in there. And then once that baby has attached, it's got home. And it's going to be good from then on, guaranteed. And so the microbiome is very impacted by breastfeeding. Of course, there are a lot of things are impacted by breastfeeding, but I'm just going to focus on the microbiome. One of the things that there are actually 200 special sugars in human milk. They're called oligosaccharides. They're not in any other milks, and their role is to provide food for the beneficial gut flora. Okay, so what happens is that the beneficial bacteria break down the dietary fibers and they produce short-chain fatty acids, particularly butyrate. And then that fuels colonic epithelial cells, strengthens the intestinal barrier, stimulates mucin production, and makes a protective layer against harmful bacteria in the gut. And the regulation of mucin, it depends on adequate levels of what's called Akkermansia. It's a gram-negative anaerobic bacterium, which grows in the absence of oxygen. And it colonizes the human gut early in life through breast milk. Good levels are 3 to 5%. And the way to get Akkermansia levels up is through fasting. Now, the babies who are born who are quite restless and cry a lot and want to go to the breast a lot, sometimes that's not the very best thing that can happen to them, especially if it's a nat carb baby. Often it's just that they're very sensitive to things in the mother's milk that are upsetting them. And so that nibbling appetite is that they want to create peristalsis, like giving an internal massage to settle everything down. So these babies would be better off giving a dummy or spacing the feeds out and resting their system so that their levels of Akkermansia can increase. Autistic children have low levels of Akkermansia. That's kind of interesting. So there's a study there. So what it does is Akkermansia is it boosts the expression of tight junction proteins and reduces gut lipopolysaccharides, which can, it has anti-inflammatory effects, so that's just good. It also improves insulin sensitivity, liver function markers, and it has a role to play in appetite regulation and also cognitive function. That's where the autism thing comes. And when you've got oxygen intolerant bacteria on the decrease, you're going to get what's called leaky gut. And that allows toxins to come in, undigested food, harmful microbes. They come into the bloodstream and they will trigger inflammation and chronic illness. This is what happens with vaccination. So also we know that there's another bacterial species called Rhamnococcus narvis. It will appear much sooner in the guts of children if they're weaned early from the breast. The breast protects against that. It's known to be involved in the formation and breakdown of tryptophan. And tryptophan and its metabolites have been linked in previous research to immune system regulation, destructive prevalence. This microbe may lead to an increased risk of asthma. And it's also associated with inflammatory bowel disease and other neurological disorders. So those studies are there. You can look at them later. So another study says that infants who will breastfeed longer and more frequently had higher levels of other beneficial bacteria like B. longum and L. gasseri. And these are important for supporting health and reducing inflammation. And at the same time, more human milk intake was linked to lower levels of S. parasanguinus. It's a microbe associated with childhood dental caries. So just a quick note before we leave this section on vegetarian and vegan mothers. Because if you're an omnivore, and you have exposure to a diverse strain of foods, you're going to get a lot more diverse strains of bowel flora. And so it's important to maybe talk about that with your ladies who are breastfeeding, who are vegetarian and vegan, and encourage them not to have a mono diet. Try and eat from as wide variety of sources as they can, because 80% of the immune cells are in the gut, and a diverse food intake really helps that. So the other thing to take note here is that, the baby doubles its birth weight in that first 6 months, and so is reliant totally on the mother's milk for that. So the metabolic strain on the mother is huge. I mean, you're still growing your baby. And so it's important for mothers to get really good levels of protein. Oh, what's happened here? What's happened here? There we go. Sorry about that. So, as I said, it's really important in that first 6 months for mothers to make sure that they get about 80 protein grams a day. An average woman's weight's about 60 kilos. So you take that as a number and add 20. So 80 protein grams a day from a wide variety of sources will keep the mother healthy and provide good nutrition for bub. B12 and polyunsaturated fatty acids can be an issue with these mums, so you need to talk to them about that. So Niels Bergman, who you may or may not know, he's a pediatrician from Africa who's done a lot of work in the kangaroo mother care scene. He makes this statement: the mother-infant dyad is a single psychobiological organism. So what we need to keep in mind here is that, a baby is born, but at that moment, a mother is also born, and they're still in a relationship, because newborn babies are quite helpless at birth. They're very neurologically immature. So that skin-to-skin contact and breastfeeding means that the neurologically immature baby continues the gestation outside the womb. So the placenta has done its job at 9 months, then the breast takes over. And we don't consider that. It's an important thing. So the baby's brain at birth is only 25% of its final size. Yep. 80% only at 12 months. Brain of a non-human primate is 80% developed at birth, so it's completely different. So the maturation of the amygdala depends on sensory input, especially touch, and the first 2 months post-birth is a critical time for this development. So being in the mother's arms is really important because it regulates synaptic connection and functional brain circuits, and this is understood to be the mechanism by which infants learn to self-regulate. So what's happening then with the skin-to-skin contact, there's nerve impulses go to the baby's brain. They activate the amygdala via the prefrontal orbital pathway, and hearing the mother's voice as she speaks to him promotes early vocalization and language development later on. So that connection with the mother after the baby's born is still very important. We're still growing our babies. And now there's the miasm to consider. Hahnemann only nominated 3 of them and says, why is that? Well, I think it's because we've got 3 metabolic pathways. And so for me, SORA is governed by oxytocin, and it's associated with homeostasis. Psychosis is associated with anabolism, and it's driven by the corticosteroid hormones. And Louisis governs catabolism, and the epigenetic driver is insulin. And I have written on that in links, and you can go back and read it later. So how does SORA affect the constitution? Well, if you're going to talk about a robust constitution, you've got to have SORA set in the optimum function where the conversation with lack in it has no sway. And right now, why is this important? Because it's the engenderer of all disease. Hahnemann tells us that in aphorisms 80 and 81. And that's because it's driven by oxytocin. Oxytocin sets to right any metabolic disturbance with the potential to lead to pathology. It's a natural antagonist to the corticosteroid hormones. So SORA keeps psychosis in check. Help keeps the constitution robust. So that aphorism number 9 is in the frame. You can have the healthy instrument focused on the high purpose of existence. So oxytocin has a big role to play. It's a hormone, it's a neurotransmitter, has a paracrine effect in the body. It's very pervasive. It regulates the autonomic nervous system, which controls all the internal organs, other key involuntary body functions, and does this by increasing activity in the PNS branch of the autonomic nervous system, which slows the heart, reduces blood pressure and energy expenditure, promotes rest, digestion, affiliation, resulting in a calm and connection effect, and it promotes social interaction. Now, this is really important when we're talking about the autism spectrum. So, if conception and birth have relied on technology, now this is a big takeaway, then extended breastfeeding will make up for that, because the estrogens in the milk induce transcription of both oxytocin and its receptors. So that means that breastfeeding upregulates oxytocin. So that's really important to keep in mind. Because not all milks are the same. We sort of think that when a baby's born, you can put it on a bottle and it'll be getting enough nutrition to grow, and it will, but it's not optimal nutrition, and there's a price to pay for that. I mean, look at human milk. There you go, there it is there. And the solids in cow's milk are about the same. The fat levels are about the same. But look, human milk's very low in protein, 4 times the amount of protein in cow's milk. Cows grow very fast, and it's got half the lactose. That's because cows are dumb animals, and we're very intelligent. The milk that's closest to ours is the milk of the ass. And interestingly, the materia medica of lac asinum is in a lot of ways very similar to lac humanum. It's not suitable though, because it's got a high lot of barium in it. So we know that, the breastfeeding, there's lots and lots of studies done on it, which says that, if babies are breastfed, they're going to be smarter. And this is a study I like to share because it was started in 1982 in Brazil, and these babies were followed up for 30 years, and the research was only published just before COVID hit. And so the huge implications. So these babies were breastfed for 12 months or more, and what the study has shown is that they had a higher IQ, more years of education, higher monthly income. So this is all because they were breastfed for just that 12 months at least. Very important to get that start going. So I'm not going to dwell on this because you can look it up. But, the thing is, cognitive function in the remedy lac humanum, when somebody comes into your clinic and they're at that low end and they're needing this remedy, they're going to be absent-minded, lacking confidence, confused, really weak memory, and thoughts are very disconnected. They're going to be anxious, sad, melancholic, weary of life, really got a bit of a death wish happening. Their delusions are all associated with poor self-esteem. They're lacking confidence, they're awkward, they feel really guilty about things that they shouldn't be feeling guilty about, and they will indulge in self-harm. Lac humanum is quite a specific for self-harm. They are indecisive, they feel that they can never be any good at anything, they hate doing exams, they really don't like to work, they'd rather just, chill out, play video games, very introspective and brooding. Their delusions are very sad. They feel that they've got no friends, that they're alone in the world, that they're neglected, that everybody else is selfish, and that, life's not worth living. But if they're compensated, at the very positive end, and this refers back to the research that shows that, you're going to have smarter people if they're breastfed, they're going to have a good sense of self, going to be very in tune with the colleagues. And the very important thing is that they can be alone, but not lonely. The compensated lac humanum person is very much unto themselves, loves being in society, interacting with people, but not dependent on that, okay? Very positive in their outlook, very confident, very assertive, they'll dress well, can't stand untidiness, quite fastidious. They like to get the job done, get organised, move on from the past, but at the same time, they're quite chilled. Love to use their brains. They're very alert. They like to concentrate. They like to think. They can think very clearly. As much mental work as possible, bring it on, bring it on. And they're always looking on how to improve themselves. So in what other ways is the nurture during the primal period important? Well, as I hope you're getting the message, human milk is the most perfect, nutritionally balanced food for human infants. It's designed to continue the optimal maturation of all organs, all systems post-birth, and research in developed countries indicates that a lack of it is associated with these morbidities. And believe me, human milk is probably one of the most researched substances on the planet. Now, this is all based on research. If children are not being breastfed, they're going to have more diarrhea, more respiratory infections, more meningitis, more ear infections, more allergies, more likely to die from SIDS, more chronic digestive trouble, dental orthopedic problems, more diabetes, high cholesterol, more learning difficulties, and more inclined to get neck when they're preemie. So, when a baby's born, the commitment that the mother has to the baby is not done. The baby then has to really go to the breast to get finished, and vaccines are never going to fill that space. But the sad news is that breastfeeding rates are really declining. England is the worst in the world. At 6 months, only 1% of women in England are still breastfeeding. But here in Australia now, it's only 15%. It was double that when I was having my babies in the 70s and 80s. So this has got implications because human milk is not being provided enough for babies on a global scale. Now, this may shock you, but anthropologists tell us that primates lack for 6 times the gestation rate. That's 54 months for humans. If you go into the Amazon forest or the plains of Africa where women are leading nomadic lives, subsistence diets, they feed their babies that long. Because if they don't, they die. There is no reaching for formula. And we're what we called altricial rather than precocious mammals. I mean, little lambs and, elephants and, a lot of other mammals are four-legged ones. They can get up and start walking and grazing straight away, but humans can't do that. So, WHO recommends at least 6 months as a good benchmark. 2 years is ideal, but longer than that, if the mother and baby are both quite willing. Huge brain development continues into the 3rd year, along with the immune system maturation. So when's the best time to wean? Well, it's a mutual decision, and the baby can go to the little one can go to the breast for all sorts of reasons. As I said, she is his safe place. Best time to wean is a mutual decision. And by the time little ones are 4, they're like, I'm too old for this, and they're off. But UNICEF tells us that 1.4 million babies die yearly due to lack of breast milk. Now, this photograph is an old photograph. It's a Pakistani woman who gave permission for lactation consultants to use it. She had twins, a boy and a girl. And her mother-in-law said to her, you're not going to have enough milk to feed 2, so you're going to have to decide. And so she decided to feed the boy. And this photograph was taken at 3 months, the day before her little girl died. See, when you haven't got money for formula, you don't have access to clean water, electricity, all of that. There are huge implications. So other risks of artificial feeding include rise in cancers, particularly lymphoma in children. Because we know that there's a substance in human milk that's protective against cancer. It's a combination of the human milk protein, alpha-lactalbumin, and oleic acid. And the researchers, this in 2004, called it Hamlet. Human alpha-lactalbumin made lethal to tumour cells. It induces apoptosis only in tumour cells, and normal differentiated cells are resistant to its effect. So women who breastfeed and have several lactations are at a much lower risk for getting breast cancer for this reason. Human milk is quite protective. The other thing is it's very protective against all sorts of microbes. That's because the secretory IgA in human milk is 5 times higher than it is in serum. So it protects all the mucous membranes in the oral mucosa and in the gut. And it protects against all of the viruses that we know of, including RSV, which I'm going to talk a bit about in a minute. And IgM and IgG also protect against these. So this is the baby's reality today. This is quite a confronting image because, it's boggling, really, because when I had my babies back in the 70s and 80s, this is all we had to deal with. And now look at this. And this lot here haven't even actually been approved. They're experimental. And then you've got pregnancy vaccines as well. CDC recommends that women get the flu vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, the DTaP, RSV now, Hep B, and potentially a flu booster. And the Hep B vaccine, the latest one, says that it's not recommended in pregnancy due to lack of safety data in pregnant persons. So that's a worry. So when we know that, this is research that came out last year, the more vaccines a child gets, the greater the chance they will get an infection or a respiratory illness or developmental delays following their inoculations. So I'm just going to have a quick word on RSV, because breast milk is protective against RSV because of the high levels of secretory IgA. And there was a study, a big meta-analysis came out in 2022, Journal of Infectious Diseases, 42 studies they looked at, 2 deaths in children under the age of 5 from RSV. So the risk of babies getting RSV if they're being breastfed is quite low. But, it's a big market looking for new opportunities, especially AstraZeneca had to pull its, clot shot quite early on during the COVID rollout. So it went looking to do some other avenues of research, and they decided to develop a monoclonal antibody treatment for RSV. It had been done before in the 60s unsuccessfully, and they named it Beyfortus. There it is there. So in France, at the end of 2023, they did a trial, 3-month trial, 200,000 newborn babies got it on day 2. And during that time, the neonatal death rate increased 50% in France. So any trials that have gone on since then, the wheels are beginning to fall off. So it's very much watch this space. But of course, the autism rates is what we're really worrying about. I mean, back in the 80s, it was 1 in 10,000. And then it went up to 1 in 36. It's now 1 in 33, especially in little ones. And then it's 1 in 30 now, according to JAMA, especially among the Black, Hispanic, and Asian children. There's research saying that maybe the seed oils have got something to do with that. Processed foods and seed oils and modern diets aren't helping. And as I said, the lower levels of achalasia and another one called caprocrosis are also associated with autism. And of course, we talk about now, if you've been vaccinated, you're going to have autism. Well, my statement about that is, if that was true, all vaccinated children would have autism, and that's frankly not the case. The rates are shocking, but it just comes back to the being robust. Yeah. So the robust babies have been exposed to lots and lots of oxytocin. If there's been physiologic conception, a physiologic birth, then physiologic nurture at the breast, the baby's exposed to lots and lots of oxytocin, so the oxytocin receptors mature and they're less likely to be on the spectrum. If none of that's happening, they're more likely to be on the spectrum, and it's the inoculations that break them, break the thread. So this will come out in research probably in the next few years now. And of course, this is what's going to step up to fill the gap. I mean, I would recommend that you look into the work of Dr. Isaac Golden here in Australia. I've used homeopathic prophylaxis in my clinic for over 30 years to great effect. And, when the babies are really little and maybe going into care and all of that, they are quite well protected on this schedule. And then later on, when they're going to school, they can catch childhood diseases. It's really important for little girls to get mumps and measles and chickenpox, because when they're pregnant and when they're breastfeeding, they've then got antibodies to give their babies. And we've now got a second generation where that's not happening. So just to finish off, our highest purpose is to consort with gods, okay? So in that regard, Prover 13 in Sankaran's Proving a Black Human had this most intriguing dream. Man went up a flight of stairs, 2 doors opened, and he's received by 2 gods there to welcome him. And I've had a lot of patients over the years say similar things in the cases that they had dinner with a movie star, or they met a prime minister, or they went shopping with the Queen, all of those sorts of things. So dreams of important people, keynote for lacumanum, remember that. And this links back to a Greek myth. Zeus, we know, was a naughty boy, and he had a lot of babies to earth women, and he wanted Hercules to be consort with the gods, to be achieved, to have the immortal status of the gods. And they say that, in order for that to happen, he had to be fed by Hera. If he weren't fed at Hera's breast, that wasn't going to happen. So the myth goes that he tried to sneak Hercules onto the breast while she was breastfeeding, or she was asleep, sorry. And she startled, and they said that her letdown sprayed across the firmament, giving rise to the Milky Way, our galaxy of stars. Now, the Greek word for milk is gala. So we have this love affair with milk, and it takes on added meaning when Carl Sagan says we are the stuff of stars. And what's the first little nursery rhyme that children learn? Twinkle, twinkle, little star. So there is this lovely connection with the star, and it's really encapsulated beautifully in this painting done by Rubens, where you can see Hercules reaching up to be fed by Hera. She lets down and her milk sprays across the firmament. She's standing on the firmament. But the thing that really intrigues me is this beautiful red silk that's across her lap and that Hercules is on, because we have this association of, if you're a star and you're attending a gala event, you walk the red carpet. It is the quintessential, I made it. Yeah, I made it. So I'll leave you with that. And the take-home way message, I hope, is that, if there's physiologic conception and birth and nurture, the business of being robust and having a good chance to have a very fulfilling life is very high. So thank you very much for listening, and enjoy the rest of the forum.